Welcome to Ojas Oasis. This is a place where you will learn how to optimize your body, mind, and spirit in ways you have longed for a long time, perhaps your entire life. Our mission is to help you cultivate, nourish, and protect your Ojas, your immunity, and inner peace. I am so excited to have you on here and just your knowledge, your experience, but I hope you know that when your name comes up in the community, in the Ayurvedic community, that everyone has so much love, respect, reverence for you, the work that you do, and also just how beautiful your heart is and your soul. And it's just such a pleasure to be around you, to hear your stories. So I thought I should bring you into the podcast and just give people that don't go to Nama a chance to hear your voice and to see a bit more about you beyond, the book that you wrote and the classes that you teach. So, yeah, first of all, I just want to welcome you and say thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me.
And behind you, I see a ton of herbs. So, are you at home right now or are you at the Ayurvedic
No,
Institute?
this is no. I actually work at my own clinic, Blue Lotus Ayurveda.
Mm,
I don't. I teach at the Ayurvedic Institute, but I have my own practice. I've had since 2001 here, and this is part of the treatment room, part of the herb room. I'm sitting in my herb room now.
amazing.
Yeah.
Would it be wild to start with the question what your favorite herb is? I'm sure you get asked that question all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I have a favorite herb. What I've noticed is that seasonally herbs tend to move off the shelf quicker than in other seasons, you know?
Hmm.
So, um, you know, my favorite herbs are the ones that work to help people, and they're always changing. Um, I think if there's one particular herb that I use a lot myself is ashwagandha,
Ooh.
but I tend to take it with other things. But I grow it and I make various things with it for my own self. But I mean, it's hard to say. There's so many wonderful herbs, and sometimes my favorite herb is the one that I'm so interested in studying at any particular moment.
Hmm.
So I would say right now, musta is a really nice one. One that I really appreciate and hope to see in India when I return to India in October, just to see it growing wild. Just because it's such a wonderful
Vishnu,
plant.
I'm going to be there in October.
Oh,
Yeah, maybe
great.
I'll see you.
Well, maybe. We'll be popping into Varanasi for a few days, but I don't know what part of India you're going to.
Well, I have I think I'm going to be there for a little over 2 months. So,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, we'll be there for six
mhm.
weeks or so, but right now our itinerary is a little all over the place, so we're not
Yeah,
sure
I
yet
would love to.
where we'll
I've
be
never been to
going.
Varanasi, so that would be awesome.
Yeah.
So, okay, you do a lot of things. I just want to make sure I don't miss any bit of your bio, but you would you say that first and foremost you're an Ayurvedic herbalist? Would you say that that is like your primary um active role in I know you're also a teacher and an author, but is sort of like your main like sort of like how I have in my previous profession I was an art director in the advertising field,
Mhm.
and we have a lot of different softwares that we need to know like Illustrator, InDesign, Photoshop. You always have like one favorite that you kind of feel really you're like in your groove when you're doing that. Like you
Mhm.
it comes really naturally, it comes really easily. Which for me was always Photoshop. So do you have like one sector of what you teach and practice that
I would say that my first and foremost love and what I do on a day-to-day basis is practice clinically Ayurvedic medicine in all of its capacity, that we have here. Ayurveda varies from village to village, town to town, all throughout India, and here in the United States, I would say that it varies as well. My practice incorporates seeing people either face to face or online, and I would say I do an equal amount of both. I really like the face to face, but with the online format and using Zoom, I meet with a lot of people online. So I would say my main focus is is in clinical practice of Ayurvedic medicine. Some of that is panchakarma, but our Panchakarma clinic uh, really serves our clientele. We get a lot of people who reach out to us and want to do Panchakarma with us. We are pretty selective here. I run a small clinic, so we can see 2 patients per day for Panchakarma, and I've never expanded out to multiple treatment rooms because we really like to have that close contact with the people that come and work with us. Um, so panchakarma is a part of a whole working system. Um, but yeah, clinical practice is my mainstay, and that's working, one on one with people. Um, Beyond that, teaching is a part of it as well. Over the course of over 2 decades, since 2001, I've been actively teaching Ayurveda in some capacity, either my own workshops or workshops through spiritual centers and yoga centers and such. And we had our own school here for 7 years in Asheville that ended right as COVID hit because we didn't want to go completely online. So I waited and just said, well, what's my biggest jam? What do I love to do the most? So my heart's just like, go back, just be at the clinic. Just if I'm meant to teach in a greater capacity again after the school closed, then it will show itself, it will reveal itself. And within about I would say 3 or so years from the time we closed our doors at the school, the Ayurvedic Institute decided to move here to Asheville, unbeknownst to me, but that they decided to move. And so at that point, I decided I would help Dr. Ladd in helping to educate students on Ayurveda. So I'm actively teaching the level 2 Ayurvedic practitioner level herbal medicine and the doctor level for herbal medicine. So that's what I mainly teach. And to answer your question, herbalism is a big part of what I do. And, there's different, streams of how people practice Ayurveda. Some people will assess the case and design a chikitsa based primarily on classical formulations. And and then, some practitioners, both here and in India, will do quite a bit of their own formulations. And I do both. I like to use classical formulations, but I also really like to compound herbal medicine uh, in an individual and customized way for my clients. And that's a big conversation. But what I have found over the course of time that I've been practicing, that the results come when the right medicines and the right foundation for those medicines to work are present. So ahar vihar chikitsa, or diet and lifestyle, as a great foundation for whatever types of treatments or herbal treatments or panchodon karma treatments, and it all kind of works together. And so as an herbalist, uh, I find that to be freeing because I'm not as reliant upon the medicines that I can procure from overseas, but I can make them right here. I can compound them just the way I want. I can adjust them. So I can take a classical formulation scheme, create it myself, and adjust it as needed. But I do use a lot of classical as well as some proprietary blends, and I find those to be helpful as well.
Mm.
I try to stay away from liquid quats because they all contain potassium sorbate to be preserved. and they come in plastic bottles, which run out fairly quickly if you're giving them at the doses I give them. One large bottle of Dashmula Rishtam might only last a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks tops. So people are piling up their plastic. And for me, liquid form products are also expensive to ship. So I use cloth tablets that can be prepared through Vaidyaratnam or Kotakal Ayurveda. There's various pharmacies making those. And I like the cloth tablets, so I use some of those as well. But yeah, herbalism is my jam. It's what I love to, and I try to empower students of Ayurveda to feel very confident creating their own formulations. And one of the gifts of knowing the herbs is that when you study the classical formulations, you can actually look and see and know why you're giving them. And sometimes there's 10 or so or more classical formulations that are so similar. And one Vaidya might choose one Vaidya might choose the other. And the way that they're able to choose along those fine lines of detail is to know what's actually in the formulas. You're not just going from a repertory or, the description of that medicine is good for this. You're actually looking at the medicine and being able to ascertain, why does that medicine work the way it does? Why is that classical formula with 30 herbs geared in this direction and have these affinities? And these properties, is because you understand the ingredients. So I like that. That's what I love about the whole art of herbal medicine, is really understanding the individual components as well as the formulas themselves.
It's very auspicious, I would say, that we're having a conversation about herbalism today, rising all the ingredients in the classical formulas, which like you just mentioned, sometimes these formulations have so many. Like, I mean, Chyavanprash is an example of a formula that has, it could have like up to 50 herbs, or Dashamula, that's already 10. And then Dashamula, Katutrayam, the decoction for
Yeah.
asthma and
Yeah.
bronchitis, that one has what, like 14 or something, or so herbs. And memorizing them in Sanskrit and then in English and then sometimes even in their Latin, um, I've gained such an appreciation for this knowledge, because there's so much to know how these herbs are
Yeah.
alone, and then how certain combinations of them create a prabhav, like a special action, a unique action that only that combination can do, or like only that herb can do.
One of the ways that this is something that comes up a lot amongst practitioners here in the United States, depending on where they study and what traditions they study in. You're studying in a school which is based in South Indian style Ayurveda, whereas I studied with a teacher primarily who's more North Indian style, and but there's still lots of crossover, right? And I don't really like to say that there's one style or another. There's Ayurveda, and depending on time, place, and circumstance, it's constantly adapting and changing. That doesn't mean that Ayurveda, as it's the core of Ayurveda, the basic nuts and bolts, what I call the primary concepts of Ayurveda, the meat and potatoes of it, in a sense, is that those core principles are always at play. But Ayurveda for thousands of years was different from, like I said, one village to another, one family to another, one state to another. And India is a huge country. And then you take Ayurveda and move it to Europe and to the United States, North America, wherever it goes, it's changing in relation to what we can do with what we have at our disposal to, in relation to, say, dravyas, for instance. We have tylams, we have oils, we have herbs, we have local herbs. We have different cuisines. One thing I say to clients is Ayurveda is not a cuisine. But yet Indian cuisine has been associated somewhat with Ayurveda because we have all of the herbs and spices that go into Indian cuisine. But that's not required. Somebody can follow Ayurveda in Japan, right?
Mm-hmm.
In South America and Mexico, everywhere, and they can apply it to their diet. Just like in South India and North India, the diets varies even more going into Tibet or wherever, or other regions. It's constantly adapting, like water adapts to the shape of the container that it's in. Um, and so there may be a leaning towards using classical formulations. And the way I look at classical formulations are like uh, themes within, say, a jazz piece or a classical music piece. You have these basic themes, and then you have some different interpretations or different innovations um, that might happen off those themes. And so the classical formulas are unique because there's so many herbs put together in a formula that have a specific action. Now, when I say specific, one formula can have a lot of action. Dashmularishtam, just as one example, has a variety of different properties and indications, depending on how it's being used and what it's being added to, as far as other medicines maybe that it's given with, and so on. When we look at a formula that is diverse like that, and we start to pick it apart, dissect it, and to discover the logic within the formula, the intelligence within that formula, that is a good practice to learn how to formulate your own medicines. Because within those classical formulas, oftentimes you might have one or two herbs or a few that are at a higher amount, but there's often a large heap of herbs that all are within the same amount. Mm. And when we look at that structure and we break it apart, one exercise I give students is to break up the herbs as much as you can into different categories, different dravya karmas, if you will. Some herbs, you'll see that some herbs have Agni, Dipan, Amapachan properties. Maybe some herbs have Brahmana properties. And we break the formula up like that. And we can often see that there is maybe even a half dozen different compartments of herbs or different aspects of herbs that are synergizing together to create one frequency, in a sense. And then when we put those together, we we have that intelligence of that formula. The same is true as if you're making your own formula. Say you have 6, 8, 10 herbs in a formula, you're still structuring your herb according to dosha pratyanaka, vyadi pratyanaka, lakshana pratyanaka. We have specific to the features of the condition, specific to the dosha that are most predominant in the individual, or the bala samprapti, what is most out of balance. And then we see and structure the formula with that intelligence, using all the basic principles of Ayurveda. So one person asked me during a lecture that I gave, well, if you're not using classical formulas, how do you know it's not authentic? How do you know it's authentic Ayurveda? And I'm like, well, what's authentic Ayurveda? If you went to a far-flung village in North India, 200 years ago, did they have all of the classical formulas at their disposal? Absolutely not. They had what was around them, what they could gather, what they could trade, maybe even what they journeyed to go get in another region and bring it back, right? And oftentimes, in quats, they're not bottles. Quats aren't plastic bottles. Quats are decoctions. What are decoctions? They're herbs that are reduced and boiled down, right? So a quat is anything you make a decoction with, right? And the classical decoctions are those gifts that we were given, in a sense, from ancient physicians that really, had a great understanding. I tell my herb students that if you're going to put a lot of herbs in a formula, like if you're going to make a formula that's like a Mahasudarshan type formula, you better know what you're doing, because you're not just saying, oh, this herb's good for this herb's good for that, and throwing a whole bunch of herbs together because of what they're good for. you're looking at, well, what are you trying to do? And that's when you start to break these herbs up into groups. Because when
Mm.
you add, when you add 4 or 5 herbs that have Agni Dipa Namapachan properties, like in Panchkola, for instance, then you have one very strong energy. And then if you take an energy like that and you start to combine other herbs with it to get a job done, then you start building that energy of the formula. So these classical formulas should be respected. But I also feel like we should be able to create our own formulations. Now that, if we live in South India and we have pharmacies full of everything we want, well, then you can go and you can appreciate that. It just depends on how you want to practice. For me, my love is herbalism, and both the classical formulations, my custom formulations, and also incorporating Western herbs into the fold as well. And I carefully select Western herbs for that.
Mm. Yeah, it's so awesome. I mean, the book that you wrote, I wanted to tell you that it was one of my main books, like my main references. I had to write a research paper on. We had a lot of assignments, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
herbal assignments in school, and at CCA, I your book was, first of all, they sell it in the front like desk area. It's like one of the prominent books on the shelf. But I feel like everyone just has your book. Like I see your book all the time, everywhere, and it's very, very helpful. It's been um, a really great guide and reference for me and a lot of my friends who are also my classmates. So I'm really grateful that you took so much of your knowledge and experience and created that for us in the West, because it's a lot more. It can be overwhelming as a Western student with all the
Mm-hmm.
Sanskrit, and you really organize the information in a very, very easy to digest way, which I'm sure is also like that's like a I feel like that's one of the Ayurvedic proverbs. Make sure it's digestible. All this, like whatever it is, make sure that people can
Yeah.
digest what you're.
I wanted it to be simple. It's not a complex book. Um, when I wrote that book, I started it soon after I graduated and moved here to Asheville, North Carolina. So I started to write the book around 2001, and yeah, I just piecemeal wrote it over the years. And at the time there was very little written on Ayurveda. There was very few books on Ayurveda that came out. I think around the time my book was actually published, Sebastian's book was published. So his book wasn't even something that was around when I was writing that book. So I love Sebastian Pohl's book. It's wonderful. There was a few others that came out around the time. So I wrote it as a book that could easily be read by anybody um, who had an interest in Ayurveda. So the introduction I tried to make basic, and then I tried to keep the herbal aspect as friendly to the budding Ayurvedic herbalist as well as even Western herbalists, because I teach for Western clinical herbalism schools as well, and I want that book to be available to them. And then you have something that's a little bit more meaty for Ayurvedic students, like Sebastian's book, where he gives a lot of definitions in Sanskrit, and is a wonderful book, and I use that book a lot in my teaching. And then, of course, you have the classics, and they're wonderful to dig in and explore as well. But those are pretty unaccessible to the average student of herbal medicine in the West until they have a good background in Ayurveda and hopefully some Sanskrit background as well, at least
Hmm.
enough to be able to read a little. Um, but I'm glad that you enjoy the book. And if I was a prolific author, I'd start working on another one. But my job really is teaching face to face and being here at the clinic. So I have very little time to write these days.
Oh, I know. I
Yeah.
said it in the beginning, but I'm just so grateful because I know how busy you are. I know how much work this all is to keep a clinic running, and just one human being, taking care of one human being through a panchakarma is it's such an immense responsibility. You know, it really requires so much attention to detail, and at the same time, we're also trying to, as practitioners, maintain our own self-care, our own ojas, our own agni, our own, you know, rhythms, our own biorhythms. And that's what I have found so far in my life to be the tricky part is no matter what you do for a living, whether you're an Ayurvedic doctor or an herbalist, like anything, um, how do we preserve our health while assisting other people's in their other people's
Mhm.
journey in their healing?
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah.
You can speak to that too, because I know a lot of fellow practitioners will feel very seen with that
Well,
statement.
self-care is key. And, in all the years of practicing, I've definitely seen the impact it can have on my own physical. And in the old days, I had my hands on each person. I used to say I'm not an armchair Vaidya. I really just did all the therapies with my assistants on a day to day. And luckily today I have a team of assistants, and upstairs right now panchakarma is going on, and I'm able to be here facilitating that, but not having to work as intensely as I did in those old days. But it was invaluable because it became a real personal experience of watching what happens during that process of panchakarma.
Wow.
And but as far as self-care goes, yeah, I spend a lot of time whenever I can in nature, because to me nature is the greatest healer. And we wouldn't have Ayurveda without the five elements in the form of nature and all the beautiful plants and clean water and clean air and all the things that um, I don't take for granted, especially in these days. Which comes back to why I really feel strongly about knowing herbs individually with students, and not just having a big memory bank of classical formulations in your head, but also know that if the supply chains are not available, how are you going to practice? How are we going to help people if all we have is what we have at our disposal? And I will say that I use a lot of the traditional herbs and formulations because I know how they work. The ones that I'm familiar with, I know very well how they work, and I can infer, based on a person's experience taking them, how to adjust those formulas, because I have a relationship with them. But when I bring a Western herb in that's not a part of the traditional Ayurvedic uh, pharmacy, I do so carefully. And I've brought herbs in, and then I've politely dismissed them because I'm not using them as much. But there's a whole variety of Western herbs that I love and see their benefit, and I see how they work.
Mm.
Like yellow dock. Yellow dock is a wonderful herb, and if I didn't have Bhumi Amalaki at my disposal, I would, boom. There's so many other options, right? And you know, there's so in that respect, that's where I feel that today, just for sustainability in and of itself, using less medicine.
Mm.
I hear a lot of practitioners, they're coming straight out of the gate and they're worried about the strength of the medicine, if they're, cultivated versus wild crafted, or, if they're powdered or fresh powdered every time you use them, and all sorts of ideas. But I use a lot of churnas. They're pre-made, but I go through them fairly quickly. And all I can say is that the right medicines combined in the right way work. They
Mm.
work. Um, Custom blended formulas work as well as classical formulations if they're well prescribed. Um, you could give 6 or 8 classical formulations to someone, and if they're not properly prescribed, the results aren't going to be optimal, right? So it really has to do with how do we take that Ayurvedic knowledge, apply it to the here and now, to what we have at our disposal, be it what it may. But if we do it well, then we're going to get results. Even if it's just the well selected words that equal that, uh, equal the suggestions that we give to someone, the comfort, the care, the presence, the ability to listen and to support that person I mean, that goes a long way. People feel really good. They start to feel the healing in Ayurveda, even after the first consultation, even before herbs can even get in there and be worked on by Agni and become a part of your dhatus. You know, it's like it's a whole process. There's a lot of more at play than just herbs.
Mm,
You know,
mm,
I would say first and foremost, it's a heart to heart connection that you have with an individual. I think that's where Ayurveda really lands, is that, and that's what I learned from my teacher, Dr. Lad, early on, is that his presence when he would meet with someone, just a certain kind word, something that he would say right off the bat that just helped the heart unfold a little bit, help
mm,
to create an opening for a person to just start to share, you know. One client of mine does storytelling, and she shares, um, you know, encourages the sharing of stories, and she helps people to work through trauma or difficult experiences in life through telling their story. And I think a lot of the healing that goes on, at least the way that that I see it, is in that connection and that sharing.
mm. I have never met, well, no, I met Dr. Ladd briefly at the NAMA conference, but before that, the only impression I had of him was from his documentary, The Doctor from India. So that was my first introduction to Dr. Ladd. Um, but I have seen it over 10 times just because um, there's exactly what you just said, the way that he presents his, authentic care in the presence of either a patient or honestly anyone. I was more than anything, it's in his eyes. And he says in the documentary, the way that turtle, like a mother turtle, shows her affection for her baby is just through the look.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I think he nailed it with how
Mhm.
he can do that. He can look at you and make you feel love. And that is one of the most powerful healing agents that we have, you know?
We all have that ability to be able to connect with each other, and that the depth and the deepening of that connection.
Yeah.
And it doesn't always happen immediately. Sometimes it takes, you know, several times meeting someone, but if there's at least that initial spark, something, you know,
Mhm.
some kind of connection. And
Mm.
so and that requires time. That's why I spend more time with people, because I feel like if we, you know, if we have that initial good quality time, 75 minutes to meet, it gives a good amount of time for getting to know one another, you
Mm.
know, and have it be a little bit more personal.
Mm.
And because our medical system today, and I have a great respect for modern technologies in medicine and modern medicine, um, I have a lot of critiques around how the medical industry is. I mean, that's,
Mhm.
I think, the biggest downfall. There's amazing cardiologists, but they're seeing 25 patients a day and they're running ragged, and, you know, mistakes happen. Um, and my wife's a nurse, and, you know, she's seen it, you know, just working on the heart unit. You know, it's just nurses and doctors are pushed to the end to just meet quotas and get on to the next patient. And it's not because they don't want to help. You know, a lot of well-meaning doctors want to help, but it's just you know, just it's the model of medicine. And so with
Yes.
Ayurveda, it gives a person an opportunity to come and kind of be invited into a more personal experience. Yeah.
That's very true. There seems to be more and more sick people and less doctors.
Mhm.
That ratio seems to
Mhm.
just continue to become further. There's more space between, like they have to preserve and protect their time. Um they need to eat lunch just like we
Mhm.
do, and they need to take a
Yeah.
breath every so often for 5 minutes and just sit for a moment. um but when,
Yeah.
like you said, when you have 25 people a day and these are life and death, these are like life threatening conditions,
Yeah.
and which require very intrusive and high risk surgeries and medicines that they have to
Yeah.
prescribe. They've got so much pressure, so much on the line. So I, just like you, I have all the respect for the people, but the system that is governing the way that they are able to help is very, it feels very, very limited. And
Mhm.
I'm very grateful that I always call Dr. Lad, like, he's the grandfather of Ayurveda in the West. He's the one who really, um, he did a lot of the early due diligence to spread the word here and start the school, the Ayurvedic Institute. And I know you were right there with him. You
Well,
were
there's a
right.
lot of, and luckily today we have so many other teachers coming. And,
Yes.
back then it was hard. It was hard to get medicine. It was hard to find good herbs. Banyan started because they wanted to provide good medicine for Dr. Lad. Nowadays we have, teachers like Dr. J, who's wonderful, so many other Vaidyas. And we're lucky. Ayurveda has really grown, and I have a tremendous respect, really. I think for, I mean, I really have a lot of respect for all the Vaidyas that are coming and sharing and teaching, in different styles, different ways, different traditions, and different streams of knowledge, in that vast, um, system of Ayurveda. And in Chinese medicine in China is TCM, and I have a lot of respect for TCM, but TCM is kind of a boiled down version of what once was a classical Chinese medicine. And a lot of people practicing Chinese medicine practice a lot of different streams of classical approaches, but the TCM created kind of a template model that they could just, here's the scope and standard, and we can just land that here in America or wherever. TCM, it just kind of boiled it down, right? Um, you could argue that some of the essences were lost or diluted in that process, but it's still, anybody who goes to acupuncture school knows how hard it is. It's 4 years of extreme study. It's a lot of knowledge. Um, and that's kind of what's happened with Ayurveda in a more institutional model in our modern day, both in India and here, right? The ancient model of learning in the parampara Ayurveda is different than it is in the university setting in India today, and it's different here too. But I really think that I want to just have that, share that respect that I have for people that learn in a traditional way as it's being taught in India. And I also respect what's happening here and its growth, and I hope that there can be solidarity and connection. Um, but the system of Ayurveda, as it's, unfolded here, there's a lot of different ideas. And if you study in a school where you have a lot of different teachers, then you're getting a lot of different ideas, or when you use ashoka and when you never use ashoka, or when you do this or when you do that. I mean, there's all these and I say there's a lot of opinions, and Ayurveda is not really it's not easy to fit in a tight box. I feel like Ayurveda resists that. So it's been very hard to create kind of a TCM model of how do you learn Ayurveda. And there's so many opinions on how to do it.
Mm.
But what I say is that if you really just bake in the core concepts of Ayurveda and you practice them, and you don't get allopathic in your thinking, and just start using ashwagandha for generalized stress and turmeric for inflammation, but we think, like, what is ashwagandha? Like, what are all of its, gunas? What is its rasa, virya, vipak, prabhav? And really, develop a relationship with all the single herbs
Mm.
and the formulations that we use, because there's endless formulations. You can't use them all, nor would you want to try to stock them all.
Mm.
But when we really dig into it, then we get into the heart of Ayurveda. Ayurveda becomes a very living and breathing science.
Mm.
I remember Dr. Ladd used to say, I'm not teaching you what to think, I'm teaching you how to think, right? Problem is that people keep taking the words of the teacher and just formulating them into a recipe. It's not like that, because then those recipes seem diluted. So someone will come from one tradition and say this, like, you should never use ashwagandha alone. Someone told my student that, never take ashwagandha alone. It should always be in a formula. And it's like,
Wow.
well, that's just an opinion.
Right,
Now, I will
right.
say I usually use ashwagandha with other herbs, but I often will just take my tincture of ashwagandha that I make myself just by itself because it's so wonderful, right?
Mhm.
Um, I have seen time and again one single herb. I have students experiment by simpling. They'll take one herb and they'll simple it. Which means take it by itself. I've had so many amazing experiences reading the stories of students taking a certain herb, like musta, for instance. I mentioned that earlier. How powerful one herb can be, it's just mind blowing, right? So think about putting them all together.
Mm.
There's, we make rules.
Right.
In the old days, if you were living in a rural village somewhere in the middle of nowhere, and all you had was one herb that fought infection, and you were trying to fight, some sort of infection on someone, that one herb could do remarkable things.
Mm.
And that's the important thing to know, is that people applied what they had in their time, place, and circumstance to what was needed in the moment, and that was village medicine all over
Mm.
the world. I call it folk medicine. And then we have more refined versions of herbal medicine that get very stratified, and you have all of the, complexities of pharmacology.
Mm. Yeah. When you said using how one herb can be used for in so many different ways, I
Mm-hmm.
jumped to anupana, like the
Yeah.
adjuvant for the herb, which really, for just folks listening who don't know a lot of the
Mm-hmm.
Sanskrit or like the principles of Ayurveda, which is why this podcast really exists, is just to get people more
Mm-hmm.
comfortable with the thinking behind Ayurvedic medicine. Like, how do we approach the medicine? How do we work with it? How do we use it? Um, and what Vishnu Das is referring to is like say you only have ginger. Ginger is incredible.
Mm-hmm.
Ginger is good for so many things. I mean, I think you, there have been books written just about ginger. I'm
I've heard of I heard of an old Vaidya in India that just uses ginger to heal people, and I mean, it was a story I heard, but it came from a pretty credible source, so I believe it. It's like a ginger doctor, right? I mean, Dr.
please
Ladd spoke about
share.
a Vaidya that used 30 herbs or something in his formulas, and so
I'm
yeah,
so curious to hear. I mean, I just know like ginger and milk or ginger and honey or ginger juice or just boiling
yeah,
ginger or like there's or making a
salting it,
paste,
salting it and drying it, and
adding
just in little
lemon.
slivers.
Yeah. And how that simplicity, how complex that simplicity is.
Yeah, I mean, one herb is pretty dramatic. I mean, if you study one herb just from a chemical perspective, they're complex. But I have a saying that says one herb can be a pharmacy.
Mm.
But that again, I don't teach my students to use one herb. I mean, I really teach them to be, develop their skills as an herbalist. But it's amazing to see what one herb can do. It can touch upon, like ashwagandha, for instance, can touch upon all subtypes of vata. It gives a foundational energy, but it gives a calming energy. It has so many different directions it moves and how it functions. So, and those herbs I consider kind of like your master teacher herbs. That's why I encourage all people who study Ayurveda to study the traditional herbs of Ayurveda. Don't just say, well, I'm going to just try to find an alternative for ashwagandha. I'm like, well, use ashwagandha for a while. I don't think there's an alternative for it. You might find another herb that has similar properties, but ashwagandha is ashwagandha. You won't
Mm.
find it. The beauty of it is that it grows all over the place. You can grow it here. You can grow it in Costa Rica. I know it grows in California. Um, it's a bumper crop here.
Mm.
And
Mm.
so we can definitely, the beauty of some of these herbs is they do grow in other areas of the world, and hopefully we can continue to keep them flourishing.
Yes. And I share your reverence and appreciation for all of the herbs and how it's like difficult to pick a favorite one because it's your
Mm-hmm.
favorite one is the one that's going to help the person that's in front of you right now that's suffering. That's your favorite herb, the one that
Yeah,
works, the
yeah.
one that alleviates suffering at any given time, or the one that you have, on you that you can get, say you're traveling and you only brought I don't know why I keep thinking of ginger tea, but let's say you
Yeah,
have Tulsi or something.
yeah,
um, how can you use what you have and get
yeah,
creative with it, to help anyone who might have gotten food poisoning or just has nausea or difficulty, maybe they're constipated. So figuring out, how do I use like the black pepper here, the salt, and add that with the
yeah.
combination and like, um
And
yeah, there's
one of the things that comes from that, I do this as an exercise with students, is like, okay, take this herb like nutmeg and study it and try and just like break up into groups, study it, come back and say, like, tell me 10 things or 5 things, just a handful of things that nutmeg is good for that you wouldn't have thought, like erectile dysfunction or something like that. Or, like sometimes it's just not obvious why a certain herb has an affinity, like why chitrak might help with diarrhea, right? So that people might just think of chitrak, oh, it's Agni Deepan. I'm just going to use it when there's Mandagni, when there's slow fire. I'm going to use something to kindle the Agni. But then it's like, well, what are the other properties of chitrak? How can that work? And so when we start to break these herbs down, what it does is it helps you to understand why some of those herbs wind up in the classical formulas you're studying. Like, why are Brahmana herbs used in formulas for multiple sclerosis or Parkinson's? It's like, of course, you want something substantial in a disorder that's degenerative and it's actually affecting the tissues, the dhatus, in a way that's diminishing their substance. And so like when and so it really helps to if you're going to create a formulary like mine where I have shelves of herbs in all different kinds everywhere and other rooms full of herbs and shelves, it's like, what herbs are you going to use? And then you put them on the shelf. You have an herb like tagar, right? We all know tagar, valeriana, walichi. If you're going to put that herb on your shelf and you only know how to use it for someone who might need help with insomnia,
mm,
then your herb's going to go stale, right? But if you know how that herb's going to work in a whole variety of situations, you're going to be using the herb more often. It's going to increase its value on your shelf. If an herb doesn't move from my shelf, then I study more in depth what that herb is for, what it can be used for, all of its various properties and indications. And then I start to be able to use it more. If we just used Vidanga for parasites, then again, how many people in a year do you see with full-blown parasitic conditions? I mean, not just what some people might say is parasite, but a true legitimate case of parasites. It's not all that often. I mean, it's frequent enough if you see people who travel overseas and such, or camp a lot or whatever. But the more diverse your understanding is on the medicines that you keep on your shelves, the more you can do with less herbs too. It can make 30, 40, 50 herbs, a massive pharmacy for you.
mhm.
And if you went to some small villages, small village doctors 200 years ago, I guarantee you wouldn't find 100 herbs on the shelf. Not unless that physician was being supported by the king or something, or in a
Mhm. Mhm.
working in a different environment, right? I mean, if you were going to a far-flung village somewhere in the foothills of the Himalayas a few hundred years ago, it would be, you know, very strategic
Mm.
and very localized, uh, and like I said, some Vaidyas had greater diversity of medicines available to them. But I do feel like, at least for myself, uh, especially living here in Western North Carolina and Appalachia with a gazillion herbs growing all around me, if I can't get something, how can I substitute? Like jadamansi, it's a very endangered herb. Like, what are we going to use instead of jadamansi? We have a whole variety of herbs, and we can't say that any of those herbs are jadamansi, but we do know that we can build up a kind of a formulation of different herbs to create what Jatamansi is doing in the body.
Mm.
Whether it's Valeriana officinalis, like Western Valerian, skullcap, passion flower,
Mm.
chamomile. Chamomile is one of the most amazing herbs that people just think it's a nice, relaxing tea to drink after dinner or something. But
Uh-huh.
chamomile was a classic herb to the old eclectic herbalists in the Western herbal realm. I mean, it is a phenomenal herb
Mm. It's one of
for
my
the liver, the
favorites.
blood, the digestion, the mind. I mean, there's no end to it. So it definitely has it's a place on the shelf right on my shoulder here. Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
chamomile is a staple for me.
Oh, it's
One of my
wonderful.
favorites.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen it benefit so many people with gastritis and all other types of digestive problems. So,
Mm.
um, yeah. Uh,
I was going to ask you, maybe I know we're almost up for the hour, but I wanted to ask you if you wanted to, if you felt called to share any of your story, like your favorite stories studying with Dr. Lad in the very, very beginning with when, because few people that were there at the beginning are still practicing now. I mean, we have a fellow friend, Ryan Strong. We talk about this all the time. Ryan was one of my teachers at CCA, and he
mhm.
told me how few people who learn Ayurveda in school are actually practicing clinicians. Like 7, 8 years later, many of your classmates probably won't be practicing, but you will. He always is very encouraging
Yeah,
and gives me hope. But the fact that you're still going and you were
sure.
here at the very forefront of Ayurveda, making it in here.
There
Um,
were a whole group of people before me.
oh,
Like in 1992, when I met Dr. Ladd, there was, my mentor, Jay Sri Lambert, who I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for her encouragement of me to study with Dr. Ladd back in those early days. I was a youngster. I mean, I was 22 years old. But yeah, I'll speak to it, and I, hopefully it can help. I do think that there's going to be more and more students that successfully graduate from schools and implement Ayurveda in a successful way. I've seen it even with my students, and I mentor students who are from other schools as well as ones that I've trained from the ground up. And there's a lot of success rate happening because schools are um, Nama has done a good job creating a structure for students to have clinical externship. And in the old days, the schools didn't have that. And so, some students would just drink it all up and they would watch, listen, and learn, kind of like the old style, how you learned how to play flamenco guitar. You grew up in a flamenco guitar family, you watch, listen, learn, emulate, and start doing it yourself. That doesn't work for everyone, it seemed to work for me, but I had to learn a lot along the way, and we're always learning, and I never stop learning. It's, I always feel new at it, and I like that. I met Dr. Ladd in 1992. I wound up at Mount Madonna Center, uh, which is a yoga community in the mountains outside of Santa Cruz in Watsonville, California. I heard about Baba Hari Das, who's a Mona, a silent sadhu monk who founded that center, and I wanted to meet Baba Hari Das and study with him. So I went there with the intention of living there and learning from Babaji. Affectionately, we refer to him as Babaji. And Babaji would arrive on Saturday mornings for class. And the night before, I was setting up my tent in the campground there at Mount Madonna. It was my first night there. And the man who was sharing the campsite next to me was named Kevin Casey. And Kevin Casey was one of the founding members of Banyan Botanicals, along with Scott Cody. And Kevin and I were friendly with each other, and we were chatting. And he said, "Hey, there's an Ayurvedic doctor here I'm studying with for a 6-week intensive. You might want to step in and listen to him talk." So I was inspired, and I went that afternoon, I think it was like late afternoon. I went down and listened to him give a talk on marma therapy, marma point. and that inspired me. Just listening to him talk, I had never heard about Ayurveda other than seeing his book Yoga of Herbs, and I was into yoga and I was into herbs even back then. So I was like, yoga herbs sounds good. I'm going to go listen to him, and it was wonderful. It was one of those experiences where it was the first time in my life I had met a teacher from India teaching any of the sciences of the Vedic mandala, and yeah, so it sparked me. I didn't know how much, but it was significant. But I didn't know where it was going to lead me. The next day, I met Baba Hari Das, and then I proceeded to live on and around the retreat center with a sojourn to India and a few other travels. Um, to study with Baba Hari Das. And towards the end of my stay at Mount Madonna and living in Santa Cruz, I had had the opportunity to sit in many times with Dr. Ladd, but I wanted to just study from the ground up. And so I had the opportunity in 1998 to go and study in Albuquerque with him. And so I moved to Albuquerque and stayed there, and moved here in 2001 and proceeded to go back a whole bunch to just do, summer intensives with him. And, so that's how I got started with it. And one of the most interesting experiences I had with Dr. Ladd in the classroom setting was in Albuquerque. I had influenza. It was a really bad case of the flu that was going around the institute in Albuquerque. My daughter was young at the time, and I was hunkered down at home sick for a good week and a half. And here Gurukula is going on, and I'm in the Gurukula program, and I'm wanting to like be in class. And back then there was no Zoom. You weren't in class, you just lost. And so I missed a good, valuable week of study, and I was anxious to get back to class. And I got a formula from Dr. Ladd that had Mahasudarshan Churna in it and a few other things. And I took it after, a good week of being sick and low grade fever with an ice pick headache and feeling really lousy and a lot of congestion. And I took the herbs that night. I had a dream that Lord Vishnu came spinning a chakra on his finger, and he threw his discus through me. And as the discus hit me, I woke up in a puddle of sweat, and I went and changed my bedclothes and went back to sleep, woke up again, drenched in sweat, took off my clothes, put on a new set of clothes. I sweat through 3 sets of bedclothes that night. I woke up in the morning with that feeling like the storm had lifted. And so I got my clothes on, took a shower, got my clothes on, went down to the institute for my first class in a good week and a half. And Dr. Ladd goes up to the board, and he loves writing with dry erasers on the board in the old days, and he took his dry eraser board and he wrote in Devanagari, Jwara.
Fever.
and, and
No
then
way.
he spent the next 2 hours breaking down how a fever moves through each dhatu. And as he did it, I watched the whole progression of my flu.
Wow.
And it was so profound. I went up to him after class, told him my dream. That was that it, and that I was never much of a student to ask a lot of questions in class. I was a little bit shy asking teachers questions, and it was just it was interesting because that day, it was like I don't know what it just serendipity, divine serendipity. But it was beautiful. And so fever treating fever has always just been an interest to me. Yeah.
I know you probably don't believe that was a coincidence. I mean, if you had just experienced exactly what he just wrote, It's almost like you had been prepared. You know,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I know what you mean.
when I was in India the first time, that was when
Hmm.
COVID broke out. Like I was
Hmm.
there and the pandemic hit. I mean, I barely got out of India in time because before the lockdown, because lockdown
Yeah.
was very strict in India. But it was very interesting when I came back to the States during that, panic in the world, actually, all around the world. But it was particularly acute here in the States.
Yeah.
It wasn't as there wasn't this fear, anxiety, worry in India at all. And in America, they're like, "Oh, thank God you got out of India. Thank God." Like, "Oh, that would have been so bad." But when I was in India, everyone was calm. Everyone
Hmm.
was calm. There wasn't, and I felt like when I came back, I was prepared
Hmm.
for anything that was about to transpire with the COVID virus.
Hmm.
Not just physically, but mentally, spiritually. Um, I had also had just received my first panchakarma, and had 2 weeks at an ashram post
Hmm.
panchakarma to really absorb and I was in Vrindavan. So I was just, and I went to the Neem Karoli Baba ashram, and I really was like absorbing things that are difficult to even describe with words, because when I studied in India, or when I was just in India, in the Vedic, like the place where all of this was written, the place where all of this was channeled, just being on the land and being in the vibrations of where all the Sanskrit mantras and the history, all the
Hmm.
sages that had been born and lived and died on this sacred land. There was an experience that, um, like as a student, we're all students of life, but like when you're experiencing this firsthand, these types of things, when you're like, your experience immediately just makes me think Ayurveda is not just knowledge. It's a Sanskrit word and it means knowledge of life, right? Like if we were to want to try to translate it from Sanskrit to English, we say wisdom of life or knowledge of life. But it's these types of experiences that you're describing where you realize it's more than that. It's a way of being where you're connected to, um, you mentioned in the beginning of our conversation how Dr. Ladd was able to open people up with just being present and being loving and caring. And when you're open to the knowledge, like this Vedic science, you start experiencing things that are so hard to
Hmm. Yeah.
explain to other people, to share this experience that you had of your fever and how what you saw in your dream, and then how you woke up, and it probably was going through each dhatu, right? Like it was like that fever was
Cooking me.
cooking. Yeah. And
Yeah.
then the moment, like that deep intelligence where you step into the classroom and you see it on the whiteboard, and just how you're like, I can't how do I explain to people what I just like, this is uncanny.
Yeah.
This is beyond, you
Life is
know.
always doing it. We're not always aware. I'm not always aware, and I don't always have that, you know, real time experience like that. But when I look in retrospect at my life, and just from my own, as I see it, I have found that life has been kind of a continuous process of unfolding in this way. It's just sometimes it's more evident than other times. Kabir Das, the great poet Kabir Das, would say, "Life, life's your greatest teacher. Life is your teacher. Life is your greatest teacher." Like, and I really feel like Ayurveda has been my guru. I would say in more real time, day to day, experience than any other teacher I've ever had. Not to devalue the personal relationships I've had with teachers, but it's the service of Ayurveda. And what does that mean? Well, it's the service of others through Ayurveda. And that also includes the service towards myself as an individual for my own health process. It's just been this journey, you know. And luckily I had the opportunity for a good chunk of years to have, you know, to have the proximity of valued teachers like Baba Hari Das and Dr. Lad. Um, you know, both of them were more of the ilk of it, instilling that idea that the teacher's within and life itself is your teacher. And so yes, it's just this kind of great unfolding. And I feel like, you know, we can refer to it as magic and or divine or serendipity or synchronicity, but you know, life is so full of it all the time. And you know, sometimes we just see it. We're in the Tao, we're in that moment where we just start to see it unfolding in real time in a clearer way. And it's but when I forget that, I can remember. I have that smriti, you know, I have that, I call it like a medicinal memory that, you know, things are unfolding as they are meant to unfold, and it's not always easy. Um, and I think it's an important principle when it comes to Ayurveda, because a lot of the times we struggle with imbalance. Our bodies are doing things we don't want them to do at the times we don't want to do them. And, you know, life is the way it is, you know, so it's a big surrendering process. One of the things I find with Ayurveda is that the healing isn't only always just physical. And you know, I'm able, sometimes I see people who are very sick and have a really deep sense of calm and ability to be able to accept, and others very minute, very minor imbalances that throw them, get them very dysregulated. I see that within myself at times as well. But Ayurveda is it's kind of like a karma yoga. It's like, how can we get up every day and do the things that we know nourish us? Like when you have a garden, you have to go out and water it. You have to keep the seeds moist. You have to keep them growing. You have to keep them protected. You have to have the right amenities and do all the right stuff to get that garden, you know, mature and bearing fruit, as it were. And we don't know, you know, you can plant seeds, you can water them, you can do all the right things, and the moles and voles come and eat the roots, or the bugs eat them, or a hailstorm takes your kale down right before you're going to harvest it. And all of these things, you know, it's Ayurveda's, because, and I think this is an important thing, because it's easy to get discouraged when we practice any system. We value it. We think of it as, oh, this system's going to heal all my ills and
It's the
make me
holy
feel
grail.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we can practice for years and be blindsided by illness or something, you know. But so it is a karma yoga. But over the course of, you know, the years of just full-time practice in this and seeing it, I can say that for those that practice Ayurveda, the results, the actions yield results more often than not. How they do, when they do, to what extent they do, we don't know. We can look at astrological charts. We can
I was going to
glean
say.
from it. We can glean from all different angles, and that can give us some perspective. Doesn't give full perspective. Only life itself will reveal it in time. And what I can say from my experiences, this stuff works. But there's also a mysterious component to it. And it just takes time. So I just encourage people to embark on it with curiosity, kind of like meditation. Some days you get clarity, you get spaciousness, you know, you touch the void a little, and then other days it's like no matter what you do, it's almost like you can't even remember to inquire. You don't. It's like you lost the knack for a moment, and it just happens. But it's good to remember all the while that life is constantly unfolding and moving us in the direction of a deeper sense of ourselves on a fundamental level.
I keep seeing this Venn diagram of, you know, these two circles, discipline and flow or surrender. Like there's something really beautiful about that push and pull between those two. because life will call for both.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes it'll
Effort,
call for
grace.
both at the same time.
Yeah.
And then it's like, wow, can I do that?
Yeah. Effort, effort and grace.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, Raman Vashista and the Yoga Vashista, I mean, all that time ago, Ram's still inquiring about the relevance of self-effort versus grace. And it's constant. They're intertwined.
Mm.
Yeah. We just do the effort. We just put forth the effort and just let things, unfold as they will.
Well,
I mean, we can't force the flower to unfold. We have to just kind of watch it, right? We don't.
mhm.
We can get curious and peek in there to see the stamens of the flower, but it's better to just let the sun, the light of our awareness, just the practice, just let it unfold. Um, yeah.
I love it. I love every single thing you shared, everything you said. We we're so lucky to have Ayurveda, but we don't have Ayurveda without our teachers. And it's one thing to have the books and everything from the teachers that lived a long time ago, but to have real living teachers right now that have tasted the essence of Ayurveda and like you said, watered the seeds, nourished the soil. I love how you practice Ayurveda. I love how you teach Ayurveda. I love how you you articulate the again, it's hard for me to even articulate because it's so deep. Like there is such
Mhm.
a broad I'm looking at all the herbs in the background of where you are, your clinic, and the infinite combinations you can make. Just like you said, just one herb, and I can't help but think that is it's just like that in life. I mean,
Yeah.
you take the bitter with the sweet, and you take the salt, you take the all the tastes of life, and you take all your
Shadrasa.
yeah, yeah,
The Shadrasa is as much a metaphorical
six tastes.
concept as it is an actual taste concept. It's how can we experience all the various flavors of life in a balanced way, and not equal amount of bitter with sweet because we wouldn't want to eat our food, but specifically how can we take in the bitter elements of life, the sour elements of life, the sweet elements of life. It is just this process of accepting, surrendering to life as it is, and also knowing when we need a little bit of that sweetness. If we practice too much tapasya, it can be bitter,
And
it can
sharp.
be too pungent, it can be just too depleting. And it's like, when do we need to just lighten the reins and enjoy a little
Ghee.
sweetness.
Okay.
A little, yeah, well, a little honey wine in the old
Mm,
ancient. If you read in the text, they knew how to have fun too. They weren't stodgy.
mm.
You know, yeah. So,
Such a good reminder. Such a good reminder
yeah,
that,
yeah,
like, studying, you want to be knowledgeable and you want to be a good healer and you want to be a good practitioner, but you also need to lighten too. You can't just be heavy. Guru. It's so funny that the word guru, how it also means heavy, in
yeah,
Sanskrit. I think that that's kind of funny,
yeah.
ironic. But um, Vishnu, thank you so much. I know we need to wrap up, and you
No,
have,
no problem. It's
but
nice to chat with you, and thanks for sharing.
it's just precious. This is precious,
Yeah,
precious audio and just a conversation that I'm going to enjoy listening back to, just hearing your stories and your knowledge. And thank you so much for keeping you're one of the, I think, the best teachers of Ayurveda in this country, and um, also practitioners. And I can't express my gratitude enough your for all your work and all your contributions. And I just hope we get more and more students learning from you, and that I
well,
hope I hope a lot of people find inspiration in this conversation. And if anyone wants to find Vishnu, like you said, you mentioned your
Blue
Blue
Lotus
Lotus.
Ayurveda, Asheville, North Carolina.
Hmm.
I do private mentorship, and we have a full Panchakarma clinic here, a full service Ayurveda clinic, and yeah, and I'm teaching locally at the primarily my only teaching these days are through the Ayurvedic Institute, and I do some work through Mount Madonna Institute of Ayurveda from time to time as well.
Amazing. We're so lucky to have you. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you for the work you do and spreading the good word on Ayurveda and your practice. So
I want to put my hands together, but I'm holding the mic, so I'm just gonna.
yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to Ojas Oasis with Sasha Bershadsky. To learn more about Ayurvedic healing, please visit ojasoasis.com. We'll see you next time, and until then, have your smile.